welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. How does pathological demand avoidance, or pervasive drive for autonomy, impact and intersect with basic needs like toileting, sleeping, hygiene, eating, and/or safety? So today we're going to talk about the intersection of basic needs and pathological demand avoidance and the ways in which it can play out in your home for your PDA child or teen, or perhaps in your own life if you are exploring your own potentially PDA identity. Okay, so I'm going to start with a story to illustrate the concept of basic needs. And when I say basic needs, what I mean by that are basically just things that our children and teens need to stay alive and be well, right? So they need to stay clean and they need to brush their teeth so they don't get like impacted cavities or disease, right? They need to toilet because it's something that humans have to do or they get sick. They need to eat or else they won't stay alive, right? And so basic needs are simply that. There are other things that of course are impacted by PDA, like, education, social engagement, movement, leaving the house. But for argument's sake, those are all things that humans don't need to stay alive, okay? So I want to just bring us back to about 5 years ago when I first moved from Washington, D.C. to where I live now, a small town in Michigan near my family, where I'm from. And I had just left my career as like one of the managers of research integrity at a large nonprofit. And so I had left that identity behind. I had left my career. I was in a new state and I was in a grocery store in the aisle of protein bars, just weeping. Okay, I was just like walking through the fluorescently lit, huge grocery store, crying and trying to find protein bars that were sweet enough that would entice my son to actually consume something with nutrients. So I was like, okay, I'll get one that's birthday cake flavored, or there's like a double fudge protein bar, because at this time, my son was eating almost nothing. Right? He was eating Lay's potato chips, Pirates booty, popcorn. Occasionally he'd eat a piece of pizza if it didn't have sauce on it and the cheese wasn't too heavy, but I was really worried about his caloric intake, his nutrients, etc. And I didn't know what to do. I had tried everything, right? I had tried all the like traditional parenting approaches of like, you don't get to leave the table until you eat. You need to eat this before you eat this. You can't have dessert unless you eat this. I did the timeouts. I did all the positive discipline, all the things. And things just got worse and worse and worse to the point where he was, which was really eating nothing of substance or nutritional value. And I had also sought therapeutic support, so we had moved into the sensory lens and exposure and the SOS feeding protocol with like 32 steps of exposure and bridging. But the therapists were noticing that although he would bridge, like he would eat a chip and then they would give him one that had like wavy chips, right? So Lay's potato chips that were flat, bridging to ones that were wavy, because it was through the sensory lens of like, oh, he needs to get used to the waves on the chip to eat something different. He would bridge to the new chip and drop the old one. Right? So through the sensory lens, the therapists were very confused because while he was adding new textures and flavors, he was then dropping what had been a safe food. So I was terrified as a mother, and I absolutely did not understand what was going on, and the therapists were confused as well. And so I felt just completely lost. And eating is still a struggle in our home in many ways, but between the ages of 5 and 6.5, he largely only ate Lay's potato chips, Pirates booty, and popcorn. And it was scary. And he did not eat any vegetables. He occasionally would eat like a Honeycrisp apple that was sliced a particular way, or if we added some dopamine into the experience and like cut it into a star shape. But for the most part, his baseline was these 3 processed foods. Now, 5-6 years later, he's still being sent to school with flaming hot Cheetos in his lunch as the primary component, but he does have other things like pepperoni or dried mangoes, for example. Okay, so certainly not bento box, rainbow of colors, what you see on Instagram type of school lunches that I'm sending. However, outside of school, he will eat things like hamburgers, fried trout bites that my husband makes, chicken. He will eat smoothies. He will try other fruits, etc. Okay, so he is still a neurodivergent eater, but he is not at the point where he's not growing and he's not healthy. So people ask, like, Casey, how did you get there? Like, what did you do to get him to eat again? What did you do to get him out of that place of eating only Lay's potato chips, popcorn, and Pirate's booty? And that inherent in that question is something that I want to bring to light for all of you, because I think this could be life-changing. It's something I was teaching yesterday about in the paradigm shift and working with parents to develop their basic needs indicators so that they know if their children are improving with an accommodation approach. So inherent in the question of like, Casey, what did you do to get him to eat, is the underlying assumption that there was some technique, strategy, therapeutic protocol that was specific to eating that worked. Okay, and in some ways there was, but it's different than the way you might think, because it's actually me completely letting go of the focus on eating and really focusing on all the other areas of his life and our interactions, where I was providing autonomy and lowering demands around things that had nothing to do with eating, like whether or not he picked up after himself, whether or not after a shower he went up to go get his clothes or I got it for him. That's an example of a lowered demand. So often, and this is totally natural, and I'm going to break it down with the logic and the why we revert to this, we're often with our PDA kids looking at basic needs struggles, in isolation and not as causally linked to what's going on in the nervous system over the long term of our PDA children and teens. For example, it's very natural as a mother that when my son stopped eating, that I wanted to find the eating specialist and the technique and the strategy to make him eat. But what ultimately got him to the place where he could eat was lowering his overall nervous system activation so that he had a window of tolerance in his nervous system and could actually access eating. Okay, so this is a very, very different logic. And I want to break it down for you with a skill that I teach both in the Paradigm Shift program, and we workshop it with parents with mentorship and live coaching. So what it's called is the PDA lens, okay? So like think of it as glasses that you can take on and off. Why is this important? The PDA lens is one lens. It's not the right lens. It's not the wrong lens. It's just one way of viewing things like the root cause of what you see with your child, their behavior and trouble accessing basic needs, and what's driving the external indicators of the challenges. So let's talk about what the PDA lens is, okay? So first of all, what is the root cause of a lot of these behaviors and the basic needs struggles? The root cause, from my perspective, is that based around neuroception, okay? So what is neuroception? It's just the subconscious perception of what in our environment is safe, dangerous, or presenting a life threat. The emphasis here is subconscious, not rational, not even necessarily something that the child or teen is aware of, because it's happening faster than rational thought. And whenever a PDA perceives they don't have autonomy, freedom and choice, or are equal to or above another, a situation, or like a teacher, a parent, a sibling, it will subconsciously register as not safe and tell the nervous system to activate. What do I mean by activate? Meaning, if we're going down the fight-flight pathway, then we see mobilization, right? The physiology is that there's cortisol, adrenaline, there is voiding, meaning you might get rid of fluid so you can actually fight or flee the lion. You want to be like nimble. So like vomiting, peeing, having diarrhea when your nervous system is mobilized. Or immobilization, which is more like feigning dead, shut down, disassociation, which like slows the metabolism down, releases endorphins like a shock state, and blood rushes away from the extremities. Okay, so there's two things going on with PDA that we want to keep in mind. When this nervous system activation is happening, we as parents often cannot see it, right? It's happening inside the body, and that physiology is continually happening in our PDA kids and teens' bodies. And this can impact their basic needs logically, right? If your metabolism is being impacted by adrenaline and cortisol and all the other endocrine stuff, and you're mobilizing, getting rid of fluids so that you can fight or run from the lion, then yes, you're going to have more struggles with digestion, potentially eating, and toileting. Right? Because like your body is responding physiologically to nervous system activation. The second thing we're going to see is the equalizing, which is like whenever there are those losses of autonomy and equality, the perception of them, then there is an equalizing behavior, which is getting back into control. So control starts to coalesce for your PDA children and teens around one or more basic needs. Okay, why? Why does it happen with basic needs? Because you can never, if you're a parent or a therapist or a teacher, you can never actually force a child or a teen to eat, to sleep, to brush their teeth. Like if they're young, you might be able to, but like as they get older, you can't physically force another person who's fighting you. You can't force a person to toilet, right? You all know this because you've experienced it. So control is going to coalesce around these things for your PDA child or teen. Okay? The next thing I want to say is through the PDA lens, this skill is that every time your child's neuroception is like, hey, it's dangerous or there's a life threat, it activates the nervous system and it builds in the system. Okay, so this is a logic of cumulative nervous system activation. So every human has a threshold for how much our nervous system can say, I'm going to die, before it builds in the system and we start having a panic response and physiological responses to everything in our environment, because we can't tolerate just constantly being under the neuroception of threat without what we see as like trauma and burnout, okay? When in the system, our child's nervous system activation is building towards that threshold, which we might not be aware of, once they hit that threshold and go beyond it, and even moving up to it, it's starting to disable them from accessing one or more basic needs, okay? So for my son, it was his eating. For another family's child, it might be like they actually can't sleep and they're moving into a non-24-hour sleep cycle, or with toileting where the child is withholding. Maybe they're going into that immobilized state in their nervous system, and like not only are they controlling the toileting, they're also having the physiology of a nervous system that is like making the metabolism slow down. So you're having constipation, withholding, potential UTIs, and caprices, right? And so we look at those basic needs struggles medically as separate, but through the PDA lens, which is just another lens, we can start to see them as a causal outcome of cumulative nervous system stress over time. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. If you're listening as a podcast, let's take a deep breath. So this is a new logic because of the cumulative nature of PDA. This is why, and I had the same exact experience, when my son got close to burnout, I had the same questions, which I think a lot of you have, which is, did my son suddenly become autistic? Did my son suddenly have a regression? And then later, the question that I get a lot, which is, did my child get PDA or suddenly become PDA? And these are natural questions because for a lot of us, our children may have intuitively appeared quite unique and different and potentially with challenges, but had not reached that threshold of cumulative nervous system activation where it's not just picky eating, it's actually getting into the territory of like, do we need a feeding tube, right? And so when this happens, it can come on suddenly and feel like it's out of nowhere, but it is a reflection of this cumulative nervous system stress, okay? Why is this so hard to wrap our minds around? Because through traditional parenting, therapy, and education, most of what we learn about behavior and in the medical system, what we learn about basic needs are separate, right? Or in the moment. So with behavior, for example, many of the professionals are trained on the ABC framework of behavior, for example. We're looking at the antecedent, like what happened right before the kid had trouble, like what happened right before the kid had an accident and pooped in their pants, for example. What was the behavior, and then what's the consequence, and how does that intersect with the behavior in the moment, okay? But for a PDA kid, that accident or series of accidents is a reflection of accumulation over time. Okay, so over time is not just after school restraint collapse in quotation marks or a kettle that boils, releases steam, and then bubbles back down in a day. For PDA, the accumulation can be over the course of a day, yes, but it can also be over the course of weeks, months, and even years. Okay, this is why you see the all of a sudden regression, or the all of a sudden my kid is autistic, or all of a sudden they're in burnout. And I don't want to say that to scare you, because what we're learning here is to look for the indicators leading up to that. And because you're here, that's like, you're going to know. You're not going to be looking at it separately as like, this has nothing to do with my child's behavioral struggles, right? But rather these are both outcomes of cumulative nervous system stress. Okay, so what this looks like, let's ground it with some things that we can see with our own two eyes, which is just a not fancy way of saying like indicators or data, right? I'm all about empirical evidence, which just means like, can you see it with your own two eyes in your own home, okay? And all of us can do that. We're all smart. We can see things. We can track them. Okay, so let's take the concept of basic needs, which I view as an outcome of cumulative nervous system activation. And so to support the basic need, we have to focus holistically on all the reasons that they got accumulated to get to that point, which may have nothing to do with the basic need. They might have to do with making them do chores, do homework, forcing them in a school where they're not accommodated, etc. But what we see is the basic needs. So we have 5 categories: toileting, parentheses, digestion, safety, hygiene, eating, sleeping. Okay, so what are the ways that we can start to see the indicators of each of these categories? Okay, so let's look at toileting. And you could have a kid, you might be listening to this and you have a 3-year-old who's like, you're starting to potty train, or I've worked with families who had adult children who still had some toileting indicators, and there's no shame in that. It's just a data point of what's going on underneath with the cumulative nervous system activation. Okay, so with toileting, what you might see is accidents, right? Having accidents. You might see control coalescing around peeing and pooping with a child where they will only poop or pee in a certain location, right? Only in a bathtub, only in a diaper, only outside in a particular location, only in the shower. You might physiologically be seeing them have struggles with diarrhea or vomiting, stomach aches, withholding for long periods of time, which can result in UTIs. You might see encopresis at a more extreme. There are shades of extremities, right? And there's obviously developmental differences in terms of a 4-year-old who's pooping in the bathtub versus like a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old who needs to use a diaper. And this is not intellectual. This is not an intellectual disability. This is a nervous system disability. So it has nothing to do with like, do they understand how to go to the bathroom, or do they have the physical skills to pull down their pants, right? And so like to use the toilet. And so the emphasis in the traditional approach, and I'm just inviting you into seeing this differently. The traditional approach is like, oh, I need to teach them the skills and I need to explain it and I need to correct them, rather than how do I bring down all of their nervous system activation holistically so they can access the skills that they may already have or can learn really quickly if we actually like lower the pressure and give them some autonomy around it. Okay, let's talk about hygiene. So the types of things we might see are refusal to brush teeth, not hand washing, not hair washing, not bathing, not showering, etc. You know, this can range from resistance and refusal to families I've worked with whose children are in burnout, who have not, their children or teens have not had access to, and I say that intentionally because it's not a behavioral response. It's like their nervous system is disabling them from being able to brush their teeth or shower for months. Okay, and this becomes a medical issue. But it is not their fault, and it is not their parents' fault. This is a nervous system disability. It's a fluctuating one, and it's not a consistent one in the sense of visibility, but it is there. Okay, eating, we might see constant and compulsive eating. That's control coalescing around eating as a basic need. We might see what we saw with my son, which is extraordinarily restrictive eating. And then we can see it intersecting with things like ARFID, or, you know, families often come in with children or teens who have been diagnosed with anorexia. Okay, different lens. Anorexia is a different lens because that's body image and based on things that are not my area of expertise. However, I'm just naming patterns in terms of what we might see. With sleeping, we might see things that are less extreme, like resisting bedtime, having a really long and intricate bedtime routine. I remember my son used to make me change the words of the books to each story every night and make up different words to the songs in order to get through the bedtime routine. What I now understand is needing that novelty and dopamine to override his resistance. The length of the bedtime routine, constant wake-ups, need to co-sleep or be physically proximate in order to fall asleep, and non-24-hour sleep cycle, which might be like they go to bed at 11, they wake up at 6, the next night they go to bed at 12, they wake up at 7, and like it rotates. Okay, so what can we do about it? What can we do to support our kids? So I'm a firm believer in first understanding the logic, and this is why I focus on it, because it's so easy in implementation to revert back to the traditional logic of the problem is toilet training, and so I need all the strategies on toilet training, right? Versus looking at, okay, what's the logic? The struggles with toileting actually might be due to cumulative nervous system activation. So how can we remove such a focus on the toileting and really focus on like, how can we like do a lot of play each day where they can control me and get that autonomy and equality need that they have for their neuroception? How can I change the way I'm speaking with them so I'm not asking so many direct questions and giving imperatives of like, go get your shoes on? How can I lower demands around things that have nothing to do with toileting? Like, you know, whether or not they put their shoes on for themselves, regardless of age and physical capacity. Okay, so this is a different logic. It's a different logic, and we're just feeling into it here as a foundation for really shifting the paradigm for how we holistically support these kids. So first thing I want to encourage everyone to do is to think about these 5 categories. Oh, I forgot safety. I'm sorry. Safety. So safety can be like destructive behavior. If we're thinking about teens, it could be more like self-harm, things that are unsafe, right? So we're starting to get into that safety realm, which I'm not going to talk about too much here, but that you can intuit what that might mean, okay? These are all outcomes that we're going to track. So what we can do is we can look at our 5 basic needs: toileting, safety, hygiene, eating, and sleeping. And we can just take a moment to reflect, okay, where is my kid or teen who I think might be PDA or just has a strong drive for autonomy and a sensitive nervous system? Where are their basic needs being impacted? Where is control coalescing around a basic need for them? And where might it be intersecting with the physiology of an activated nervous system? And so for you, that might be, not near a burnout state or a medical type of impact, but more like, they're really waking up 5 times a night and coming into my bed. Okay, that's an indicator. Let's look at it as an outcome. Okay, so I'd love for everyone to just take a moment here, if you're open to it, to just think to yourself, what basic need feels relevant to your family? And there can be more than one. And what I see is often that unless your child or teen is in severe burnout where all basic needs are pretty impacted, there's often one where control coalesces more intensely, and I call that a sticky basic need. So then what we can start to do is we as parents can be empowered to get on the same page as our partners, communicate with pediatricians and therapists, and believe our own intuition by starting to track, okay? So what we can do is we just want to think about a baseline, okay? What does that mean? It's a starting point. So with the basic need that you've chosen, we can just start to think about qualitatively what's going on, right? Like, okay, my kid makes me make up new stories every night and sing new songs, and they resist bedtime. And then that's the qualitative, and then we can put kind of a quantitative or a number on it, like, my bedtime routine with them lasts an average of 60 minutes each night. Doesn't make it wrong or right. It's just an indicator. Or we might be thinking like, my child has, 5 poop accidents each week, but not on the weekends. Then we can start to see, maybe it's related to school. Okay, so we want to start putting some numbers around our baseline without judgment and without necessarily evaluating. We're just starting to see the picture clearly, right? For my son, it was like, okay, he eats 3 things consistently. Most days he only eats Lay's potato chips, Pirate's Booty, and popcorn. That was his baseline in burnout. But then I could start to see over a timeline that is longer than a day, as I started to accommodate more in all the areas outside of eating, that, he is starting to express some interest in what I'm eating over here. He's poking at my sushi, or he's asking me to lick that mango strip that I'm eating. Okay, then that's an indicator. These are the indicators that we want to look for from our baseline that tell us not that we've solved the problem overnight, but that we're moving towards progress based on lowering that overall accumulated nervous system activation so that they can access the basic need. So what I always recommend for families, this is an activity we did in real time and with parents coming off of mute and workshopping together, was we established a baseline for the basic needs. We picked a timeline, like, are you measuring over the course of a week or 2 weeks? We don't want it to just be a day because that's too close. And then we figure out our indicators or our measurement, which is like, okay, they are constantly eating. And then we put some numbers around it. Like before school, they're wanting to snack. And during the car ride, they're wanting to snack. And then when they come home, they're constantly asking for food or sneaking food, right? And we can get these incidences of sneaking food. How many times did they sneak food, and how many times were they fixated or in a cognitive loop around the eating? And we can look at that as an indicator of okay, that's happening 5 times a day. And instead of trying to control that, of what can I do to make it stop, which I know that's what you want because you're scared, and I was too, and it's this is basic needs stuff, so you want a solution right now. But there isn't one other than bringing down their nervous system activation if we are working through the PDA lens. And so we can exert some certainty and control by tracking this without judgment. Okay, 5 times a day, we see these incidences of control coalescing around wanting to eat. And then the next day we look at it. And then we look at it on average for a week. And what we want to see over the course of a couple months, if you're consistently working through a nervous system and accommodation-based lens, which is what I teach, then we see, their compulsion incidences are going down. Maybe it's not resolved entirely, but instead of 5 times a day, 2 months later, it's 3 times a day. Okay? And only you can track this and know what the data is. And this is also important so that you start to believe yourself, right? Because a lot of you on this call, something is resonating with you inside of what I'm saying, inside of your body. As I say it, you're yeah, there's something that's true about that. But then you're going to doubt yourself because you're still thinking through the old paradigm, which is I need to control this, right? And I get it. I've been there. It took me a very long time to get to where I am today with this understanding that I want to share with you. So this does not mean you never, in cases of safety, intervene. But if you are in a position where you have tried literally everything and things are getting worse, then I want you to trust yourself so that you can start to see it through a different lens and track the indicators of the basic needs. All right, my friends, it was so nice to be with you, and I hope to see you here again soon. All right, bye. Thanks everyone for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.